Hey everybody, it's Erik Clancy alongside Patrick Kelley. It is December, is it like 14th?
The 11th.
The 11th. Who knows anymore? It's the 11th. We are the Weekday Warriors of Wrestling. We got a lot to talk about today. Remember, guys, like, subscribe. We had no comments last week, so feel free to comment. We're going to be talking about AEW. We're going to be talking about Impact. We're going to be talking about NXT. Maybe some main roster WWE as well. But yeah, so let's get into it. Last week, we had the big Winter is Coming show, which, shattered, not shattered because it didn't, but had huge numbers as far as viewership and interest across the board. And you and I specifically talked about how coming week, both from an artistic perspective and creative perspective, and from a financial perspective and a business perspective. So we talked about this because Sting coming out and having that kind of hook, we had a whole segment last week where we were like, you don't announce the guy, so you get a big reaction. But what that can do, if you do it correctly and people like the segment, is it draws interest next week. And I want to talk about Impact. And I know that came chronologically before AEW, but we saw the numbers yesterday, and AEW actually did better this week than it did last week. I know people were like, oh, it was like 995,000 viewers. And people were like, oh, it almost hit 1 million. People need to get over the million aspect because it doesn't, I guess it's nice from the sense that like you have that many people watching. So theoretically there's arena sales and ticket sales and stuff. But like AEW has like their viewership and wrestling for the most part, their viewership is low compared to other people. It's that 18 to 49 demographic that gets wrestling noticed. AEW was number 2 on the night. I can't remember. Actually, I think it was number 2 last week, too. It was underneath college basketball. This week, it was just under MTV's The Challenge. It was actually number 1 in males 18 to 49. It did really well in 18 to 34. Its female number is like competes with Raw. In fact, a lot of these numbers compete with Raw. But Patrick, this is exactly what we're talking about. It's creating a storyline where you've got that surprise, like Eric Bischoff talks about in his book. He says, like, I think it's like surprise, anticipation, action, something. I don't know. You need these components of whatever to create the storyline. But they did enough with the Kenny Omega Moxley stuff and the taking the belt, and they did enough with the Sting stuff to have huge numbers, their biggest number since I want to say October of 2019. And like, I want to point out how big that is, because you and I talk about it every week. Everybody talks about cord cutting. Television, like the average goes down. Like the average show, I think, like or network or whatever declines like 15% or something year over year. AEW is up 28%. They are up 28%. That is a huge accomplishment. They're gaining viewers in this era of wrestling. I'm sorry, in television, and it's just incredible, really. All the stuff you and I talked about last week. Like, here's what you are trying to do, and here's what you hope it leads to.
Absolutely, and you and I have talked about it a lot. You've got to create those stories. You got to do something to get people invested in what they're seeing. And I think Sting's debut last week and the ending to the title match last week were more than enough to get people talking. And it obviously paid off this week.
Yeah, and the fact of the matter is, like, you can have great matches till the cows come home. AEW has great matches. NXT has great matches all the time. But, like, there's no overarching hook that really brings you in. If you look at pro wrestling in the Attitude Era, and if you look at the Rock and Wrestling era, 2 eras in our modern times, because I'm not going to compare this to like 1950s pro wrestling because it's a different ball game. But if you look at like that era, like look at the NWO, it wove through the show. It like drove storylines. Look at Austin and McMahon. Look at the Corporation. Look at how all that stuff drove storylines. Look at the Summer of Punk. Look at times when look at Nexus. Look at times when interest has been up. And what's the key factor? It's some sort of interesting, different thing that pushes things forward. Now, I'm not suggesting you pull a Vince Russo and you have like fucking exploding like diarrhea bombs or insane shit like that. Like, tell a coherent story, but like do what Marvel does. Tell this like, oh, Thanos is getting the Infinity Stones. Now that's doesn't have to be in every episode. I mean, maybe you have them fighting Ultron, or maybe they're like, Spider-Man's foiling robbers. But like, if you have this major story that you build up and you're telling, you can really drive interest in your product, and that's what AEW did. And I thought there was a tale of two shows. Let's jump into it for a second. Let's go into this. Chronologically, Impact came first, Patrick. I watched Impact on Twitch because I don't get Access TV. What did you think of the show?
I think a lot of people watched it on Twitch. From what I've heard, the typical numbers that Impact does, and obviously I think you're in the same boat. This is the first time either one of us has watched
I haven't watched it since like 2010, since the Hogan Bischoff era.
Yep, there you go. So, from what I understand, the normal viewership on Twitch is like somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000. And this show topped off at like 52,000 or something insane like that. So huge jump and huge spike in Twitch viewership, at least. The show itself, honestly, I was just waiting for the Kenny Omega thing. So everything else that was going on was just kind of white noise. I figured they were going to save Kenny Omega to the end. I thought the segment with Don Callis, I think it established their characters well. I think both of them are doing a great job at portraying the characters that they're trying to convey to everybody. And they laid little nuggets of like things that they want to do for the future. Like, ooh, Kenny's going to go around. He's going to collect belts and all this other stuff. But there's no like major bombshell or anything like that was dropped. And the same thing on AEW the next night. You're kind of waiting for that next major step in the story, but they're just kind of leaving breadcrumbs at this point. So, Omega is going to be on Impact next week, so hopefully they do something a little bit bigger.
Yeah. So, and it's also pointed out that Access recently started paying to be recorded in the Nielsen ratings. So you're now seeing them tracked, and they actually made the top 150, and I think they tied NXT in some demographics, which just is insane to me that happened. So I'm going to say I did not like the show. I went in there with an open mind. Part of me was foolish enough to say like, oh, I hope they'll open the show with Kenny, but this is pro wrestling. They're going to string you along as long as possible. And to me, right, this was the golden opportunity for Impact to show exactly what it has. And I was not impressed in the least with this show. And I'm coming clean slate. I'm coming in interested because Kenny Omega is coming over there. And to me, it just came off. And I'm not trying to be a dick when I say this. I'm like legitimately wanted to be entertained. And it just came off as diet WWE. There were so many things. And it was just, there were so many invisible camera segments, like just constant skits and stuff. The commentary with Josh Matthews and Madison Rayne was so reminiscent of like the WWE corporate speak. It was like push these story. It was just so lifeless. And then the wrestling, I didn't think was very good. And like, you know what? I can excuse that because I know they don't have as much talent as WWE or AEW. But like, I mean, I've seen better MLW shows. In fact, I think MLW puts on great shows. I've been to a few. They run Queens a lot, and there's a place not too far from my apartment that I where they run shows. I mean, with the exception of like Chris Bay, like I was not impressed with anyone really. There was like a guy with a stuffed animal, and like Tommy Dreamer's there, and it's just like I'm like, this sucks. Like it just there wasn't anything interesting to me about it. And like honestly, the Kenny Omega thing, I was like, I wasn't super impressed with it. I thought they danced around the issue. Like the thing that the big thing is that Kenny Omega is gonna like collect belt championships like he's Thanos and he's getting all the Infinity Stones, right? So he's got the AAA Mega Championship. He's got the AEW. He's going to go for the Impact one, I guess. Maybe he's going to go for the NWA. That's like a super cool idea. But they went through this whole like it was all part of the plan. It was all like you didn't need all that, and it was like dancing around the issues so much. And I don't know. It just felt very unfocused as a promo to me. So I was just like, eh. And then the thing that annoyed me the most is they did the exact same promo on AEW the next night.
Yeah, they did. And again, I think they're stringing us along, but
which I'm fine with. I'm totally fine because I get like you can't pay off all the storylines at once. Like AEW had the Inner Circle going. They had the Cody things. AEW had more than enough stuff to keep me going, and I get that. But like Impact to me, it's just like you have like 70 times the eyeballs that you normally have, and like I don't know. To me, that wasn't the best show they could put on.
No, absolutely. And from what I understand, the show was already pre-taped, so they couldn't like fix it, and they just kind of tacked on the Omega thing at the end. But still, it's like they've been planning this for a while. You would think.
Yeah.
You would think that they would have put their best foot forward. And this was actually like the go-home show to an Impact pay-per-view. Final Resolution is happening this weekend.
Yeah. I mean, like, yeah. It didn't feel like a go-home show to me.
And I hate to say it, but, Rich Swann is their world champion. So
yes.
Let that speak for itself.
Yeah, no, I mean, I thought the same thing. I'm like, I think like Rich Swann, like I said it when he was in WWE. I'm like, cool. He dances to All Night Long. Like, okay, cool. I think he's like fine. Like, I liked the gimmick he was doing in MLW when it was like the like he was like the asshole activist type. Like that was pretty cool. But like I don't know. I didn't enjoy it. So I came in there. I'm like, okay, this is the first time in 10 years I'm watching this show, and I'm like, oh, yeah, So yeah, all right.
It really kind of shows off how thin their roster kind of is when they have to rely on people like Tommy Dreamer and even Eric Young, who's a good hand and everything, but it's like he's treated like a legend there now because who else do they got?
Yeah, and that's I mean, that's when you have this many. When you have the bidding war that you have, like, you're going to be overpaying for guys who aren't as good, and talent is scarce, like there's only so many guys to go around that really move the needle and really move numbers, and you either have to find them or you have to be really good at making them, and making stars isn't easy. It takes a lot of investment. AEW's building stars, they're building them, but they're like not there yet, and they've done it for over a year, and they've also been like doing a really great job at it. Like, I don't know how good of a job Impact is. I'm assuming not great. And like and they don't have the talent or I don't think the creative mind that AEW has. So, well, but AEW I thought was a pretty good show. Let's pop right into it because that was a show. I mean, like, and here's the thing. Like, I grade AEW on a curve. Like AEW, I thought Dynamite was a better show than any wrestling show I saw last week. But like compared to the previous week's show, which I thought was like fucking insane, I was like, yeah, it wasn't as good, but it was a good show. We opened with Bucks against TH2. I've heard conflicting things on this. I spoke to some of my friends and they're like, oh, I love that match. I really believe they could lose. To me, like, there was nothing wrong with the match, but for me, it was way more competitive than it should have been.
Yeah, and you just highlighted the problem with modern wrestling. Sometimes champs need to just go out there and beat people. And for whatever reason, nobody seems to want to do that anymore.
Yeah, I'm not saying they go out and crush Proud and Powerful or like Best Friends, but like TH2 like beats like nobody on Dynamite. I mean, if they win in dark, that's fine, and like I'm cool with that. But like, I don't know, like the Bucks are supposed to be the best, So it was just a little too competitive for my taste. Good match. It was good action. Like Matt sold the leg really well. I like enjoyed it. I'm just like maybe the Bucks just like don't need to pull out every finisher against TH2. And I like TH2. I like him as performers. I think Jack Evans is a really funny heel. I think Angelico, if he ever actually gets some ambition in his life, could be like a main event player. But like as far as how they've been promoted, like I do not think they should be that competitive with the Young Bucks.
No, I agree. They just recently started getting promoted again on TV and, like you said, on Dark just recently. So it's kind of like, all right, they've been nobodies for almost the entirety of AEW, and now all of a sudden we're supposed to care. And wait a minute, and now they're almost beating the Bucks. What's going on here?
Yeah. Good match, but yeah, I disagree with the direction. In our second segment, which I thought was bold as shit, like I thought AEW really like. There was almost not a down segment on this show. They like really loaded it up. Mm-hmm. We had Cody come out with Arn Anderson, and then Sting came out. We got Tony given. We had a cool moment between Sting and Tony, which I think people enjoy. I think they're like there's this great thing that I've seen on like Reddit and other places where like people are just happy Tony Schiavone's like having a good time because he left WCW and he's so bitter because he's like, this sucked. This company became like fucking terrible and imploded. And then he's like, WWE didn't want him. And like TNA was terrible and was doing the Russo stuff that he hated at the end. And he just like turned off wrestling. And I think there's a personal aspect to us as wrestling fans to say like, I don't want anyone to like hate wrestling. Like that's terrible. We love wrestling. So the fact that Tony Schiavone like is having the fucking time of his life there and just seems to enjoy it. It's like, hey, cool, man. Like that's a nice thing about 2020.
Yeah, for sure. And his commentary last week was what really put the Sting appearance over the top. Like he sounded even more excited than us fans did.
Yeah, especially that this is an incredible moment. Like that, it was just like you could like feel the emotion, like the little bit of like trembling in his voice. It was nice. Yeah, Tony came out. Sting was salty, man. I loved it. I like what AEW did there. Other wrestling companies might be like, hey, we're both faces. So like, hey, you're great. I love and respect you. But there was a little bit of edge to Cody. He's like, oh, I'd love to share a ring with you. What are you doing here? And Sting's like, I'm not here for you, which is like super like passive aggressive and great. Darby's watching this whole thing. And then Sting grabs him and see you around, kid. Like it was great for two reasons. So they didn't Sting didn't come out and he didn't say, here's why I'm here and give you all his motivation, which I think some people may have liked. And that's fine. They can let us know that eventually. There's still a story to be told. But the story that it did tell was that Sting, like it gave you character insight. So Sting came back and he's like, he's not here to grovel. He's not here to like kiss the Elite's ass. He wants to do something. He feels like he has something to prove, and he's kind of feisty about it. So like, it gave you some insight into Sting and how Sting is going to be in AEW, and I thought that was cool. I thought the whole segment was really well done.
I thought so too, and I think it raised anticipation for. It seems like. I mean, if Sting's going to wrestle, it's like, all right, are they going to do him and Cody? Are they going to do him and Darby? Are they going to put him in a War Games match against Team Taz and all of the faces on the other side? I don't know. Well, it's we're still trying to like find our way through the forest at this point, but it's still intriguing.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I mean, the obvious thing that we've all thought of is Sting is going to be associated with Darby, which I think is good, but they haven't gone there yet. There are plans for Sting to wrestle in a I'm hoping an Andre the Giant in Japan capacity where he's just standing on the ring apron and not doing anything. Because number one, I don't think Sting needs to get hurt. And two, I don't think Sting needs to do a ton. I think if he goes out there and just punches some people, it's like, oh, cool, But I think it's more interesting to have him like as this advisor almost on the show. It'll be similar to how Vampiro was in Lucha Underground. And like, Vampiro wrestled like, I don't know, twice maybe.
What match? Just the one?
Yeah. The one against Pentagon, which was great when he came out as like Pope Palpatine. And it was great, and his character was so interesting. And he never actually wrestled, so I think Sting can bring a lot to the table there. I've always said this before. Sting is better on the mic than most wrestlers. Like he's really good on the mic. I think he's underrated on the mic. I think the problem
people
was
forget that because he was most over in his career when he didn't talk.
yes. And I think when he was going against guys like Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan, who were so over the top and insane that you're paying attention to them. But Sting has always just been a really well-spoken, articulate, like believable guy. I've always felt he's been great on the mic. I actually loved his mic work as a heel in '99 during that 2-month heel turn that he had. I actually thought he did some good work on the mic then. So the Sting segment was good. We had the Inner Circle ultimatum where they all agreed that they were going to be friends again. The best part of the whole segment for me was, and Jericho's done this multiple times, so that Jericho is aware that this is the thing that people have a problem with. He's like, you can't say he was trying to throw in the towel. We've gone over this. We all watched Dynamite. We saw you do it. And that's like the best thing, because WWE will always do these things where like, I saw you do this. I'm like, just watch the fucking tape. Just take a second and go back there. And like, you can still have your drama. You've just got to be less lazy about it, And and
that's something we criticize WWE for that for almost the entirety we've been doing shows together. So this is a thing that's been a problem for a long time.
Well, there's that inconsistency, right? So everybody out there can see everybody in the audience can see the monitor, but the wrestlers can't see the monitor. Like what? And like, there's a camera back there, but there's not. That's the thing. Like, WWE doesn't get that. And like, they're like, well, it's entertainment. I'm like, I get that it's entertainment, Vince, but Star Wars has established that there's a force and you can move rocks with it. And like, if you train in the arts of the Jedi, you can like use a lightsaber and do all this stuff with the force. Like, what happens if somebody just started using the force and like, oh, fuck, I don't know. Like an untrained character that never studied in the Jedi ways,
I think you just highlighted everybody's problems with episode 7 and 8.
Well, I mean, the bottom line is like, I think a better example is like, all right, so you have, like, that's actually a terrible example, but the like, let's say we read a movie's theories and like, bananas are poisonous, and the whole like series, like, bananas are poisonous and you can't eat them, people eat them and they die, or they touch them and they get a rash and they get killed and stuff. And then one day somebody in the background, or like a main character, is just eating a banana and nothing happens, and it's never explained that person has an immunity to bananas or anything. They just do it and they just forget about it. Like, that's destroying your own internal logic, and people don't like that because it takes them out of suspension of disbelief. Now, if you said that to WWE, they would say, you're just being too negative. And it's like, no, I'm fucking trying to watch this and you keep giving me reasons to hate it. Like, they never understand that, like, oh, so we're a sporting event, but also we're not, but also no one can see on the TV, but also the announcers can, but nobody else, and nobody watches the show. Like, none of it makes any fucking sense. There's no internal logic to the show. AEW has moments, and I fucking hate it because I think it ruins an otherwise fantastic show, where they'll have an invisible camera segment. They don't do it much anymore, but occasionally Dark Order would be one that I'm looking at directly. And there was that one with MJF kind of looked at the camera when he brought them in to see the Butcher and the Blade, but they don't do them much anymore. But they do have invisible camera segments, and they're not great. But WWE has made it a fucking art form. And like, you have to have an internal logic to your shows. What the fuck was I talking about?
We were talking about the ultimatum segment and Chris Jericho pointing out, like, I watched this last week, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. So, I like that. It'll be interesting now that they've like had their like problems and now they're like getting back together. Like, how long before the inevitable, breakup and problems occur again?
Well, Swagger and Wardlow seem to want to come to blows, so he was looking at me. Just keeps staring at me.
Yeah, that was great. Also, I liked how Wardlow just insanely just started shouting at him. Sometimes in pro wrestling, you just need this jack dude to start screaming at the top of his lungs. Like, it's just needed in pro wrestling sometimes.
Yeah, and Wardlow, he's a guy, I gotta be honest, like, he gets better and better every time I see him. It's like, you think, like, okay, they stuck him with MJF because he can't talk. And then you see stuff like this, like, oh, he can talk after all. It's like, oh, he's probably a musclehead, not that great of a worker, but it's like he had the cage match with Cody, which is one of the, and granted, he's working with Cody, but it's...
Yeah, he's working with Cody, yeah.
But he also had that
improving.
match with Hangman. Yeah, absolutely. He had the match with Hangman that was very good too. So it's like he's getting better in all areas.
He is, and like that's the thing you need to let these guys improve, because there's this perception that all big guys are bad workers, and that's not true. Like Undertaker became a great worker, and like, you know, there are guys that can work really well with their big. Here's the problem with them: when wrestling promoters see big guys, they immediately get like dollar signs and they push them too hard too fast. Like you didn't have somebody taking Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels or Daniel Bryan to the top of a show before they were ready. You had them around working in the undercard with everyone, learning all different styles, getting better and improving. And by the time they were there, they're like, these guys are amazing. Well, you know what? Shawn Michaels wasn't amazing in 1999. He was great. He was athletic, but he wasn't the guy he would become in 96 and 97. Bret Hart wasn't perfect in 1981. You know, like, he got there in 92, 93, and hell, then he got even better in 97 with his promo work. But like, you know, it takes a while. The problem is when Vince sees Lars Sullivan or the Great Khali or whoever, and he immediately puts him in the spot without them like really having to earn it or learn enough to get there. That's when the problem happens. So as long as, I mean, look at Brock now versus 2002 Brock. I mean, it's not even close.
Oh, absolutely. But 2 points I want to make, one of them relating to a current event. But it's funny that you mentioned Bret Hart, because I heard him tell a story once where he was doing early Hart Foundation promos. So this would have been like 85, I think. And Jim had to carry the load on the promos because Bret just wasn't any good at it. But Bret would go back and watch the footage, and he noticed that he was so nervous that his eyes were darting across the screen and going everywhere. And that's how he got the idea to start wearing sunglasses, because it's like, I can't let people see me like that because I look like a nervous, scared little animal. And so that, you know, he improved part of his look by covering up the fact that he sucked at something, which I think is interesting. But another thing, you mentioned like big guys that get pushed before they're ready. How about like Keith Lee? Have you heard about the recent situation with him?
Yeah, that he's one of there's Otis, there's him, there's Dabaco, Kato, whatever his name is, getting sent down to the performance center because Vince doesn't think they can work.
Was Nia Jax one of the ones that was sent over? I'm just curious.
No, she wasn't. She's not like most girls.
She is not like most girls. Yeah, most girls seem to be safe workers. I'm just saying.
I did. Are there aspects of Keith Lee's game that can improve? Yes. Would I send him to the performance center? Probably not. You know?
Yeah, everyone's fear is, and the opinion that I seem to be hearing over and over again online is that they want him to work like a traditional heavyweight, when his whole deal is that he's a heavyweight that can do like cruiserweighty type things. So it's like, it's probably going to hurt him in the long run, but you know, we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, I guess. Like, I mean, I see where they're coming from, but I'm also like, you know, in this day and age, like, I don't know. Just fucking tell him that then. like, I don't understand. Yeah, I'm just like, is he saying like, no, I don't want to do that?
I have no idea.
I feel like he could do that, you know?
Maybe.
Yeah. All right, we had FTR versus the Varsity Blondes, who were watched by over 1 million people, meaning the Varsity Blondes are super draws now, Patrick.
Brian Pillman Jr., man.
I love Brian Pillman Jr. Actually, I think he's got a great look. I think Griff Garrison could be something one day. I mean, I don't know if he's going to be a world champion or anything, but like, he's got a pretty good look. He's decently tall, in decent shape. So I'm like, you know, I think I think AEW is like scouting so many people and like just looking for these guys, and like I think it's smart. They're like giving people opportunities, and like if you pull an MJF and you hit it out of the park, or a Sammy or whatever, like hey, you welcome to the show. Orange Cassidy. I mean, like it really reminds me of Attitude Era WWE when they're like, hey, we've got spots open. You want them? Take one.
Yeah, and it's amazing, and we've talked about this before, but when you look at guys like MJF and Darby and Sammy, I'm like, these were guys that I had either barely heard of or I'd never heard of before. And then they get to AEW, and it's like, wait a minute, I think they've got something with these guys, and they've just hit it out of the park.
Yeah. What else do we have? We had the main event was MJF and Orange Cassidy. I thought it was fine. I appreciated the booking because I think MJF needs to keep that diamond ring. As funny as it would have been to see Orange Cassidy like leaving it places and not caring, which would have been funny, I think it does a lot more for MJF's character, and it gives you more. It just enhances him so much more.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder: is the Dynamite Diamond Ring, is that something that's going to be like an annual thing that they just defend now?
It seems to be, yeah.
Which that could be nice, and MJF could win like, let's say 4 or 5 years in a row, and then somebody finally beats him.
Yeah,
it will be a big deal.
Well, there's like there's so many things the company does that like pays off. I mean, do you remember when they announced the Dynamite Diamond Ring like last year? You're like, this is some fucking WCW bullshit. This is some battle bullshit. And you're like, and then MJF wins, and like I think we all thought Hangman was gonna win and stuff, and then MJF wins, and then he's got this ring that like he's a bigger asshole with it, and he uses it to win matches, and it's like such a staple, and it's like, that really did pay off. It really added another layer to MJF, and you're like, like they do think about things ahead of time. It's the kind of long-term planning you and I talked about that Vince used to do. Like it's the kind of stuff where you're like, oh, it's Diesel killing people in the 1994 Royal Rumble because we know at the end of the year he's probably going to be champion. Like it's that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and, we attribute that stuff to Vince, but I wonder, the recently passed away Pat Patterson and those type of guys that were around Vince during those formative years, like during the Rock and Wrestling era and during the Attitude Era and those type of things. It makes me wonder, it's like, how much of it was Vince's genius and how much of it was the other people that were involved at the time?
I think it's a combination. Yes, I think like Pat Patterson, and I think like, was it like George South in the 80s, like during the Hogan era, like did a lot of the booking? I don't know, but yeah, it was like somebody. It was always somebody else. But I think what happened is the fact that the company got so. First of all, it's a public company, which I think was a terrible idea for them. I mean, it made them a lot of money, but as far as like ensuring the health of that company going forward, like I just think it got hampered so much being public. But I think it got so big, and there's so many aspects for him to look on that, like, he can do as much cocaine as he wants and sleep as little as he wants. There's going to be a point where you can't focus correctly. Like you just can't do it. There's like, they've done studies on this. And I think you look at Vince and that's the case, because I mean, Nash talks about that stuff, like in all of his shoot interviews where he's eating ravioli and shit. He's like, I used to go up to Vince and I'd say, well, hey, what am I doing? And he'd pull out his notebook and he'd be like, well, let's see, it's Survivor Series, I have you here. And then like he would have his like top guys, and he would chart out where they would be going. And it would, like, for the most part, make sense because he had a handful of guys that he focused on, and he would book them correctly. Do you, like, it never happens anymore, but do you remember it stopped happening in 2001 because WCW was gone, because there was so much talent that they had. They never, I'm trying to think of one other instance. I don't think I can. Until Triple H in 2001, they never, if you won the world title, you never won the Intercontinental title after.
No, the closest I can think of,
maybe Pedro.
Well, yeah, Pedro Morales, I believe. Yeah, I believe that's true. But the one I was thinking of, the closest I'd ever seen, I had seen guys fight for the world title and main event like Roddy Piper and then win the IC title. But prior to that, I had never seen somebody win the world title and then turn around and win the IC title later. It never happened.
Yeah, it never happened. And that's because it was a careful process. And when you were put in the main event, you were like, that meant they had faith in you as a star. And they're like, you're going to be, once you're there, and we're going to protect you and stuff. And that faded away. I mean, you can, in fact, if you want to see like how little they care about that kind of stuff now, there is I think a lineal championship history. Somebody on Reddit does it, and they've got like the best in the world title, like Shane McMahon's best in the world title, like, oh, this person beat Shane, and et cetera, et cetera. But there's a lineal champion or something, and it's like, oh, based on like who beat who in non-title matches or something or whatever. And if you look at it up until 2004, it's pretty much all top guys. And it's like, it'll be like, oh, Hogan beat this guy, like Savage beat this guy, Brett beat this guy, Shawn beat this guy, and like it kind of sticks with the world title, but not always. Like Undertaker has it for a while and stuff. But you get to 2004, and after Eddie, it's like fucking like Luther Reigns and Orlando. I mean, I don't know if those names are there, but it starts going down, and you don't see guys like you previously did, and it just shows they don't protect the guys, like, except for Cena, which of course they protected forever. He was the one guy, but they don't protect guys like they used to, and they don't have these plans for everybody. They just have guys floating around. There's too many of them, and they're just like, well, whatever.
We'll put him somewhere. Well, it seemed to start. I hate to say it because I actually did enjoy his title reign, but JBL, it was like he's a tag team guy that's on the lower end. Then the tag team breaks up, and out of nowhere, he's main eventing a pay-per-view, and then he wins the world title. And Bradshaw, to his credit, was able to portray a character that was able to carry the title for that long. But after that happened, it felt like, it's like, well, shit, I can put the belt on anybody. Jinder Mahal, what are you doing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at, you look at that and you're like, I mean, first of all, his matches were all bad. Like, the character was good, but the matches were bad. And like, yeah, it came out of nowhere. And I think, I mean, that's the dual titles too, right? They got more opportunities to experiment with those titles. And so you basically have a real world title. And then the other one is essentially the Intercontinental title or the US title or whatever. But so like there's JBL as a champion. Like Kane wins it eventually. Like well after Kane was like a viable main eventer. Like Jinder Mahal, like you said. Who else was there?
Oh, Jack Swagger.
Wait, what?
Jack Swagger.
Jack Swagger, yeah, that's another good one.
Jameis. Alberto Del Rio.
Yeah. No, and there were guys that, like, it's just like they don't deserve to be there. And it's, if you look at look at New Japan. Like, I mean, okay, the evil thing aside, fine. I mean, like, you're not going to see Goto win the world title. You're not going to see Hanma get close to the world title. We might never see Sonata win the world title, but like, they're like, hey, we've invested in Kazuchika Okada. We've invested in Tetsuya Naito. We've invested in Jay White. Hiroshi Tanahashi is like Antonio Inoki levels of beloved. These are our guys. And like, I don't mean to, like, I hate, like, I'm going to rest on my laurels and you're just going to have these guys and you'll have a WCW like slog of a main event. Like, no, there's a way to phase people in and out, but like, there's also a way to make sure you're protecting the people and essentially the underpinnings of your entire company. Because like, if everybody's the same level, then like, why the fuck am I watching,
Right, exactly. And any other sport, and we've talked about this, but any sport, you need your lower level teams to make it look like the good teams really are that good.
Yeah, you need your, like, You need your Brady Patriots era villains. You need your Yankee era villains. You need your you need your Tysons. Like those are the things that drive business and and captivation, and your Conor McGregors and guys and girls like that. But yeah. So okay, so we got a little bit of time left. Patrick, you saw War Games. Why don't you give us your thoughts on the show?
Well, I'm going to be completely honest here. It's probably the worst takeover they've ever done.
Really? I did not see it, but I'm super interested in this opinion.
Yeah, it's this was probably the first time they've done a takeover where it felt like the main roster, where it's a bunch of gimmick matches that don't really mean anything. It's overbooked to holy hell, where the matches are way too long. And by the time you get to the second War Games match at the end, I was done. I mean, the show was only about 3 hours. It felt so much longer than that because the matches just went way, way too long. That strap match took years off of my life, and it was overly long. The entire show was nothing but people kicking out of finishers and doing big spots. None of it really meant anything. They didn't generate any intrigue coming out of the show. Like, none of the results resulted in the show becoming more interesting or NXT becoming more interesting moving forward. Actually, the stuff they did on NXT this week with Karrion Kross coming back, that was completely separated from what happened on the pay-per-view. But it was, this is probably the first NXT takeover I didn't enjoy.
Wow. Now, so let me ask you this, because somebody reminded me that this was 6 years ago. Yeah, it was 6 years ago. 6 years ago was Our Evolution, which, I mean, some might consider the greatest NXT takeover of all time.
It's up there.
And it may not have the best matches from top to bottom, although the matches are very good. And that Sami Zayn Neville match is to me, I know people say, "Oh, Nakamura, Sami Zayn." No fucking way. The other one, one's a finisher kick out with cool chants going on for the first time, and the other is a story being told between two competitors, and it's way better. So how different did this show feel from that one?
Well, Our Evolution felt like it felt like a culmination of so many stories and so many things. Like you said, the Sami Zayn situation. I believe that was the same show that had Charlotte Flair and Sasha Banks, and they had an amazing match. So,
yep.
There was plenty of stuff going on there on that show, especially in its main event. And you look at this one, and it's just not there. It just wasn't there this time. There was no big pay. The closest thing they had to a payoff was the Undisputed Era getting even with Pat McAfee, and they even kind of mess that up because there's a point, and this is when I talk about the matches being too long, this is the type of stuff I'm talking about. So the closing War Games match, I believe, went about 30 minutes. I could be wrong, but let's just say 30 minutes for the sake of it. And there comes a point in the War Games match when the Undisputed Era are all standing tall and all the heels are beaten down except for Pat McAfee. And now it's it's a 4-on-1 gang war, and they're just going to beat the ever-living crap out of this guy. I'm like, okay, this is your finish. You got the heel isolated, and they're just going to beat the ever-living tar out of him.
Yeah.
That's your finish. The match continued for another 10 minutes after that.
Oh, man. Did other guys, get up and stuff?
Yep. And the finish, it was it had nothing to do with Adam Cole and Pat McAfee. It was I think it was Kyle O'Reilly doing an elbow on somebody. I don't even remember who it was. It was just such a flat finish. It's guys, you had your finish 10 minutes ago. What are you doing?
Yeah. That's unfortunate. Yeah. And they that's do you remember that Barr versus Rollins and Ambrose match where they had that killer move in the middle? I'm like, that's your finisher, dude. You don't, just because it's not your actual finisher doesn't mean it can't be the finish of the match. Just do that. That's that's a better match.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, oh boy. What do you think with the TV leading up to this and everything? What do you think led to a show like this?
You and I have talked about it. If the only explanation I can come up with is that they gear the TV show around having great matches every week, you know, throwing everything up against the wall to try and take viewers away from AEW. And so when you do that, you're always having these big moments, big matches, and these high quote unquote pay-per-view quality matches on TV every week. So before the Wednesday Night Wars, NXT would be a 1 hour show a week, mostly squash matches and promos, and then they would slowly put the building blocks into place to get to those takeover specials, and the takeover specials would just be fire. Now, I mean, you're basically getting the same thing as you get on TV, so it just doesn't feel special anymore. And right now, they don't have any stories going on. They don't have any the level of intrigue that AEW has right now with Sting and the Kenny Omega situation. It's they just got nothing going on right now.
And I think we're going to end the show on this, but I would like to hear people's responses to this in the comments. You and I have talked about this multiple times, and obviously people's natural reaction is like, just put NXT on Tuesday. They'll increase their viewership and they won't split the audience. But we know that the goal isn't to do that. Like it's to hurt NXT. It's to hurt AEW. Like we know that that's the case, because we've seen NXT's numbers on Tuesday and it's a lot better, and they chart higher and they do better. And USA doesn't want AEW to get near Raw numbers, because they're like, we're paying $200 million a year for this. The other company's paying $45 million for that. We look like idiots. I need to protect my job from not looking like I made a terrible deal. So you have that. So that's always the idea. Do you, and this I ask our listeners, Patrick, I ask you, I ask myself, has WWE made a mistake in allowing NXT there to be a competitor, which is essentially forged AEW by fire? The reason I say that is because in 2019, 2020, AEW shows are much, even with COVID. Now, without COVID, I feel like they would be like huge, but like even with COVID, AEW shows in 2020 are better than they were in 2019. They have improved. There was like rampant like interference and DQs, and the refs would ignore it, and it was like garbage. And Patrick, you remember a year ago, we were on Talk Shoe at the time before we moved to YouTube. I went on this scathing rant of how shitty AEW had been after that December 19th episode, that Dark Order episode where they ended it with the Dark Order just beating down all the top faces. And Marty Scurll didn't come, and there was no payoff, and it was stupid, and everybody looked dumb. And that is the only time, like regardless of total viewers, is the only time NXT has ever beaten AEW in the ratings. And from what I understand, Tony Khan took that personal, and he's like been actively trying to improve the show since then. I wonder, and I ask you, Patrick, and we'll leave this open-ended, we'll ask our listeners, did WWE make a mistake? And is AEW now in a stronger position because they didn't have to compete with, if there was nobody there to compete with, would AEW have had their feet to the fire as strong as they do now? And now they're in a stronger position with bigger stars, with more stars, with a bigger lead over NXT. They're at a 0.45. NXT's at 0.17. Like it's not close, ladies and gentlemen. It's not even close at all. Like they're number 2, NXT is number like 60 on most weeks. So I ask you, and I'd love to hear people's opinions. Did WWE create a monster with AEW?
It's something to think about.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. So all right. Thank everybody for listening. Always appreciate it. Remember to like and subscribe below. We definitely appreciate the support. We appreciate any comments you have. But shout out. Let us know how you feel. But for myself, Erik Clancy, alongside my partner here, Patrick Kelley, we are
signing off.